For freedom, Christ has set us free. Stand firm, therefore, and do not submit against the yoke of slavery. Galatians 5:1. Dear Lord, it seems like all of our lives we're trying to please you and honor you and do your will, and it's a bar we just fail to grasp, and somehow there is freedom. Help us to see your law as a release, as something healthy, as something good that nourishes us, that we just want to walk through because you put those works in front of us to do already, knowing that even if we stumble, Jesus has lived a perfect life so that through him we can honor you. Amen. All right, so there's this mother. Her name was Martha. And her daughter's name is Mary, and Mary always did the best she could, but Martha, she always had this saying. She said, you're either doing it the right way or you're doing it the wrong way. And between you and me, you know, when Martha said the right way, she meant her way. And the wrong way was any other way that Mary or anyone else might have tried to do her best. And it seemed like more often than not, Mary did the wrong way. There's this one time where Martha trusted Mary, just a little girl, to make their home recipe of chocolate chip cookies. You got to have the flour and the sugar, a little bit of salt, and their special ingredient. I'm not good at baking, so just imagine some ingredient. What do you put in there? Maybe caramel. Would that be good? Chocolate. Oh, the chocolate chips. That's a good idea. So, the special ingredient for the chocolate chip cookies, their home batch, is chocolate chips. Mary makes the cookies, puts them in the oven. They come out nice and warm. She gets her mom, Martha, a glass of cool milk, brings her to her lazy boy chair as she's reading her favorite book. She takes a bite. She didn't do it the right way. No chocolate chip cookies. Chocolate chips in the chocolate chip cookie. Wow, what is going on? She scolded her. She said, Mary, you know you got to do it the right way or the wrong way, and this is not the right way. And she says, Mom, I'm too little to drive to the store, and we're out of chocolate chips, so I didn't know what to do, and I just made the cookies anyway. But the refrain continues throughout her whole life. While she's doing laundry, she either folds it the right way, which she often fails to do, or the wrong way, which she does more often. When she's setting the table, it never seems like the plate and the fork are the right distance from each other. It always tends to go the wrong way and not the right way. She tries to wash the windows, and instead of going one way on the inside and the other way on the outside, she's using a circular pattern. Again, clearly not the right way. If only she could do the right thing, make her mom proud, then everything would be okay. Centuries after Israel received the law of Moses, the law of God through Moses, Jesus gets to come and eat with them at their tables and talk to them face to face about life and how it's going and how great it is to live in this world that God has made as his own children of God. And he realizes something, that their pastors, their teachers, their religious leaders, the scribes and the Pharisees, as he's speaking with them, they're pretty adamant that the people need to do it the right way and not the wrong way. The right way being their way, and the wrong way being anything else. Bearing this law of Moses from Leviticus seems like an impossible thing to bear on their shoulders. It's too heavy. They don't know what to do or how to succeed, no matter how often they try to be righteous, live the right way perfectly and acceptable and pleasing to God. They just cannot live up to his expectations and his way. They are just human, After all, it's an impossible task. And Jesus makes it obvious that it's pretty impossible on the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5. He says, "You have heard it said, 'You shall not murder,' but I say to you that anyone who's angry with his brother, they're murdering. You have heard it said that you should not commit adultery, but I say to you that anyone who looks at another with lust in their heart, they've already done it." That's adultery. If your body part causes you to sin, cut it off, throw it away. It seems like we're meant to have this sort of inerrant discipline and pure obedience, and we just can't do it. We're not able to. We're limited. We have a sinful flesh, after all, don't we? But if you read the Gospels, you can see the nuanced difference between what Jesus says and what the scribes and the Pharisees and the pastors and the teachers, the religious of the leaders of the time, are saying. Jesus admits the law is good and perfect and holy and just and righteous, and it's God's way, and God is perfect and good and just and righteous, and so we should do it. But there's also a purpose behind it, a personality that comes with it. To see this example, take, for instance, Matthew chapter 23. Jesus warns the scribes and the Pharisees. It's the 7 woes. And a woe is like a warning saying, watch out, hold on, you're going the wrong way, you're about to fall off a cliff. He says, whoa, 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 woe to you, scribes, Pharisees, you hypocrites. You tithe your mint and your dill and your cumin and have neglected, they're following the law to the letter and even above and beyond, but have neglected the weightier matters of the law. The laws that have a higher impact according to God, justice and mercy and faithfulness. They had this habit of adding to the law. They had over 300 that they could lift off, trying to do the right thing instead of the wrong thing. And their right thing didn't match what was righteous to God. It was getting in the way of being there for their neighbor. What Jesus says, it doesn't go against the law. In Matthew chapter 5, he says they've come to fulfill the law and the prophets. He's doing what we're meant to do in the first place, and we just can't. But they're acting like, to give you a modern example, it's like a policeman who's there at the station doing all this paperwork, too busy to go stop the bank from being robbed. He's doing the right thing, but a bank's getting robbed. It's a fireman who's at this great banquet, a fundraiser. You got to raise money to make sure we have the trucks we need and the clothes we need and the water we need. That bill keeps getting higher. But while he's at the fundraiser, the courthouse burns down. He's doing the right thing. He's doing what he's supposed to be doing, maybe even above and beyond. But what really matters, being there for people, the core part of his whole vocation, his job, what he's called to do in his life, it's fallen away. He's distracted, neglecting the order that he received in the first place. Jesus makes it clear that the core law that takes precedence over all these others, the courthouse that needs to be the fire relieved of, and the bank that's being robbed, where we need to focus is loving God and loving others, those that are around us. That's how you fulfill these things. There's nothing that goes against these laws. That's what's the most important. He explains it to them in Matthew chapter 12. If you have a sheep and it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, you're going to go save it. You don't want to lose your sheep. And it's right after he healed a man with a leprous hand. And he says, well, of course, I'd be there for him too. How much more value is a man than a sheep? Why are you so distracted by all these other laws when you're supposed to be there for each other? Get your priorities straight. You and I know that the time of the Reformation in the 1500s, they're distracted by the very same thing. They had indulgences. You could pay your way into heaven. You could go on pilgrimages to earn your success. You could pray to all the saints you want, doing exactly the right thing, the right way, which was whatever the Catholic Church at the time decided to declare is right for them, and everything else is wrong, no matter how much it cost or who might get hurt because they're in the way, leading to the excommunication of Martin Luther. But today, are we really that different? If Jesus came and sat with us at our table and he spoke with us face to face about life and how it's going and how are you doing with the law anyway, and are you living in grace or not, would we be that different than the Pharisees and the scribes and the teachers and the pastors and those people that he met earlier, just 2,000 years ago? Okay, I know you know many of these stories, and I feel like I know you pretty well, so I know you're a very unique, loving, special church. But I can't tell you how many horror stories I have heard about people who have been to church or met Christians and just can't go back. They've been hurt or jaded or lost or embarrassed or ashamed, not sure why they would even feel like they belong in a place like that. In a place where these people call themselves Christians, but they're struggling with the sins of the flesh too. The slander and the gossip and the anger, the fits of rage, the ones we seem to skim by thinking they're not that bad. When I was going through college, I worked at maintenance at a building, 11 stories in Cudahy, Wisconsin. And my manager, my supervisor, one day he pulled me aside, knew I was going to school to be a pastor. He said, "Josh, if you're all supposed to be so Christian, right after church, as everyone's leaving, why do they speed so fast? Aren't they supposed to follow the law?" That's a good point. That's a good point. Maybe we're not so good at practicing what we're preaching, or walking the walk and talking the talk. There's so many parents who feel like their kids have to be perfect if they're going to church. They can't be whiny or hungry or tired. They can't fall asleep during the sermon or preach while the pastor's preaching. Can't afford the distraction. Maybe it's easier not to go to church at all. Instead of teaching them the church is a place where they're meant to just be. We love it when a kid's crying out, even during the sermon, because, well, maybe they should be a preacher one day, but even if not, we're just glad they're here. They're part of the church. They should be with us. This is where they belong. They shouldn't be punished just for being a little bit antsy. They should learn that this is a place where they learn and grow, when they get to play hide and seek in the pews if they really can't pay attention. That's okay. This is our family time together with the Almighty Father. In my generation and after my generation, there's many teenagers who come to church. Maybe they grew up in the church and they figure out, the church sometimes doesn't seem so Christian. There's drama and hate and divisiveness, and all these worldly things seem to come in the door like we're some sort of worldly people when we're meant to have a higher bar, to be beyond it, to put our priorities first. And what were those priorities? To love God and love each other. The rest falls into place. How could they be vulnerable and come to us when they see so much haughtiness and so much gossip, when they have a mental issue? Or they're struggling, when there's so many high schoolers who are thinking about suicide, who need help, and they feel like, well, they won't understand me. They're not my age. They're not from my family. They don't know what the world's like anymore. Will they even listen to me? There's so many at church that insist there's a right way and a wrong way, and The right way happens to be my way. And as a pastor, please don't believe that if I ever tell you that. In Colorado, before I was a pastor there, they had an interim pastor. I won't mention his name. He was very quick to be rid of their contemporary service. And they lost half their members. But the right way was his way. Giving into some sort of Christian culture with the bands or with the organ, instead of just being Christian to them. Doing the paperwork or the fundraiser instead of putting out the fire or saving the people at the bank. I was at my parents' house last weekend, as you probably know, which is why I probably didn't figure out the microphone wasn't working until now. It's working now. And Saturday night, my dad's a pastor, and he gets a call from another pastor 30 miles away. And he asks them, do you know any extra organists? Because our organist is sick, and we can't do church without her. And it reminded me of a story of someone I met here in California who grew up in the church, and he's Catholic, and he's never gone back because one Saturday evening, his dad was chewed out by the priest because he couldn't make it in to fix the organ in time. And I bring up this story, and I talk about it with people, and I say, well, what did we do before we had an organ? How could you even have church, right? Wow. Can you even be Christian without an organ? And we have a wonderful organ and musicians who can play it so much better than I could ever dream of even attempting to do so. But the core of our identity is to worship God and to love each other. No matter what songs we're singing or how great the music is. Maybe I'm just on some, we're not going to use a banjo, but no matter what's happening, the church, it doesn't need a building. It doesn't need a bunch of money. It doesn't need all of these secular things that seem to get in the way, distractions from who we actually are. The church just needs God and each other. And don't get me wrong, we can use a sound system, we can use the organ, we can use piano, we can use anything to the best of our ability to worship God to the best we can. But if it gets in the way of loving God and loving each other, then we're just as distracted as the scribes and the Pharisees and the people during the Reformation. And Jesus needs to come to us and say, whoa, warning, stop, you're going the wrong way. Remember who you are. That comes first. Whether it's Sunday morning or Thursday night, when you're there in the community, you know who I am and you love me and you're there for each other. Whether you brought an organ with you to the American Legion or not. You're just Christian every day of the week, all the time, and you get to use this magnificent building and these instruments today to remember how powerful that is, to worship God to the best of our ability and to make sure He stays with us throughout the rest of the week. If we were perfect, Jesus would have saved the trip. He wouldn't have had to be born or go through growing pains or to die on a cross. He would have let us handle it. But we're not perfect. The distractions do get in the way. Sometimes we have to say, whoa, hold on, wait. Let's reanalyze, let's prioritize, let's focus, love God, love each other. How does that plot to the rest of the commandments, the rest of the things we're meant to do? Not out of pure blind obedience or discipline, but out of this liberating freedom. We get to follow God. How great is that? He wrote the book on life. It's healthy. It should make us feel good. And it releases us from the burden of sin. But then our own flesh gets in the way, and we start to divide and slander and hate and gossip and get distracted again. And so then we remember that Jesus knew we weren't perfect, and so He did. He was born in a manger, went through growing pains, lived to die to save you and I that perfect life so that we could live. Not burdened by this yoke of the law or of sin, but free to flourish and bear these fruits in our lives given to us by only God himself. Only the Son of God could give us that life through his death and resurrection. Okay, and so I didn't finish the story from the beginning. You remember Martha and her daughter Mary? Okay, so Mary, she grows up just like kids often do, and she has kids of her own. She's married, and it's time to go the weekend to go see Grandma Martha, to visit their house, to see how she's doing, and she's warning her kids on the way there, you remember Grandma, everything has to be perfect. It's either her way, the right way, or the wrong way, and she makes sure all of her kids are on their best behavior. They're well coached, they listen, they don't speak when they're not spoken to, all those things. And then they're setting the table for dinner to the best of their ability. And they don't see Grandma that often, so they go and they get the fancy china, and the kids are bringing it to the table, and then one drops it, crash! Pieces all over the floor. Grandma Martha walks into the kitchen, sees the child with that look of horror on their face and the pieces of the dish all over the floor, about to make someone cut their foot, and she laughs. It's a big guttural sound. She laughs. She can't hold it back. It's just so hilarious to her, and it's because she's grown up a little bit. Everyone else is wondering, is Grandma really okay? This doesn't seem like the Grandma we remember. She kneels down and gives her grandkid a hug. She says it's okay. She's a little wiser. She knows we're not all going to be able to do the right thing the right way all the time. But when we mess up, we're still going to love each other. She's just glad her family is there with her, even with their flaws and mistakes, just to have that time together. You can always buy more fancy china. If you can't, you probably don't need it. But while you're here in this world, your life is meant to be about them. Spending time with them, with each other, with the people around you, especially when they're not perfect, because they need you to help them in that hour of need. And you're there, loving God and loving them first, because Christ showed you what that looks like. Because God loved you first. God, thank you so much for loving us enough to send your Son into the world, to live, to die, to rise, to save us, being perfect so that in our imperfection we may be forgiven, comforted, loved, and saved. Even death has no power over us. Amen. Thanks. Godspeed, Starman. All right. Trust me, Godspeed. Oh.